"You don't belong here." I froze as the HOA Karen, standing in her pink bathrobe, screamed right in my face outside my own house. Was he calling the cops just because I'd moved in one day early? Was she serious? But when my eyes drifted toward her driveway, my heart nearly stopped. She'd been breaking the law for years without even realizing it. And right there, I'd stumbled upon the evidence that could completely ruin her. The woman who thought she ruled this neighborhood had just given me the weapon that could bring her down. Go ahead and try to guess what happens when I confront her about this secret. Now, I've seen some bizarre things in my life, via divorced couples fighting over who gets the good coffee maker, contractors arguing endlessly about crooked tiles, but a grown woman in cat slippers waging suburban war on me before I even had my keys out. That was brand new. For a moment, I wondered if I'd mistakenly bought her house, or maybe I'd run over her dog and blocked it from memory. But my only crime was existing in my own driveway. My name's Austin, a master plumber, freshly divorced, and apparently public enemy number one. According to the Bathrobe Patrol, the morning air carried her shrill voice so sharply it made dogs bark 3 houses down. Her bathrobe belt flapped loose behind her like a tattered white flag she refused to wave, while the pink terry cloth rippled in the breeze like some deranged superhero cape. Even her bedazzled phone case reflected tiny rainbows across her scowling face. The whole thing felt surreal, a coffee scents drifting from nearby kitchens, birds chirping, and her accusations slicing through it all like the soundtrack of a twisted breakfast play. The slap of her fuzzy slippers against wet pavement cracked through the neighborhood like gunfire, the start of suburban warfare. And then it escalated. Her name, I quickly learned, was Abigail Gonzalez, a name I'll never forget. She wasn't just lashing out in a morning tantrum, she had props. Out of nowhere came a clipboard, a measuring tape, and even a professional camera with a telephoto lens. This wasn't random neighbor drama. This was a carefully staged performance. She had planned this. She'd been watching my house, waiting for the perfect moment to stake her claim of fake authority. "Ma'am, what seems to be the problem this time?" That was Officer Riesa, and the way he emphasized this time told me everything about Abigail's history with the police. She spun toward him like this was her moment to shine, waving her clipboard like it was the Constitution. "This man is guilty of unauthorized early occupancy and commercial trespassing," she declared, pointing at me as if I were holding a weapon instead of my own house keys. I calmly handed over my ownership papers, a deed, title, every document proving I had every right to stand there. Ray's looked at the paperwork, then at Abigail, her curlers poking out of that robe, and I could see 2 decades of law enforcement experience written across his face. "Ma'am, this gentleman owns this property. He has every right to be here." You'd think that would have ended it. Wrong. Abigail puffed herself up like an angry bird and launched into a rant about neighborhood standards, property values, and making sure the right kind of people lived there. The right kind of people? I was just a plumber who'd saved for 3 years to buy this place, but in her eyes, I was apparently a threat to the neighborhood's safety. Then came the truly unhinged part. She whipped out that camera and started snapping pictures rapid fire, like a paparazzo tailing a celebrity. My truck, my tools, my coffee cube, and nothing was safe. The sound of the shutter clicked along with birdsong, creating the soundtrack of the weirdest Tuesday of my life. "For documentation purposes," she announced, as though conducting some official investigation. That's when Tom Collins, my neighbor across the street, showed up. He offered me a cup of coffee with a friendly smile, but his eyes told a different story. He'd clearly seen this show before. "I work from home, software developer. I see everything that happens on this street," he said quietly, slipping me his business card. "Trust me, you're going to want to document every interaction with that woman." The warning was clear. This wasn't a one-time incident. And then I noticed the AMA survey stakes near the property line. Fresh dirt around the orange flags told me they'd been planted recently. Each time I glanced at them, Abigail got jumpier, cutting me off to harp on her imaginary rules about early occupancy. The way she guarded those stakes, I knew they were connected to a secret she desperately didn't want me to uncover. As Officer Reyes finally persuaded her to retreat, I had my first real look at her home. Built in the 70s, it was well kept but screaming for attention. Every hedge was trimmed like a military parade, every flower lined up in perfect order, as if she were trying to prove something to the entire world. Even from a distance, I spotted her blinds twitching as she resumed her surveillance. Abigail had turned neighborhood watch into her full-time occupation, and I was now her primary target. Her hatred wasn't casual, it was personal. She looked at me as though my existence itself offended her. Normal neighbors don't wage war over parking or moving dates. That much was clear, but standing there in my driveway with my house keys in hand, I realized something. Normal had abandoned this neighborhood a long time ago. That night, I caught Abigail Agena draped in a winter coat over her bathrobe, still in those ridiculous cat slippers. She stretched industrial measuring tape across my yard, snapping photos with that professional camera as though my home were a crime scene. She wasn't just measuring anymore. Abigail had started marking the ground with orange spray paint, mapping out some kind of battlefield strategy right on my lawn. A text buzzed from Tom across the street. "She's been out there 2 hours. Just made a call." That ended with, "8 tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. sharp." I stood there staring at those glowing orange lines under the streetlight, wondering what kind of circus Abigail had scheduled for Donna and why she needed those marks at all. Remember when I thought she was just a cranky neighbor having a bad day? Yeah, that was laughable. Matilda Macron v. Austin, thinking people are basically reasonable. Cute. This woman had documented my morning coffee routine like I was a terrorist plotting an attack. She had 47 pictures of my truck parked in my own driveway, and these weren't artistic shots either. They looked like evidence from a police surveillance file. As I scrolled through them, I couldn't help thinking, lady, if you put this much effort into literally anything useful, you'd probably cure cancer. But instead of saving the world, she decided to turn me into her personal science experiment. The next morning came with a fresh kind of nightmare. At dawn, my entire property looked like it had been decorated for a bureaucratic Christmas from hell. Violation notices were taped to everything in my truck, my front door, my mailbox, even my trash can. Each one came printed on official-looking letterhead stamped with the bold title, Maplewood Neighborhood Standards Authority. Sounded legitimate, right? Except there was no such organization. I called the city planning office just to be sure if they'd never heard of it. Turns out Abigail had created her own shadow government, complete with violation codes, fine structures, and enforcement policies strict enough to make the IRS look lenient. Commercial vehicle in a residential zone, $200. Unauthorized early occupancy, $200. Disturbing the peace through intimidating presence, $300. Apparently, just existing on my own property was now a finable offense. But it didn't stop there. Her surveillance system was right out of a Cold War spy thriller. At exactly 7 a.m., she was parked in her beat-up sedan with military-grade binoculars, a thermos, and a legal pad thick enough to be a novel. She had positioned herself with perfect sightlines to my driveway, front door, kitchen window, even my garbage can. From behind my blinds, I watched her observing me with the dedication of a wildlife biologist tracking a rare species. Coffee at 7:15, mailbox at 7:20, plants watered at 7:25, back inside at 7:30. She was building a complete database of my daily existence, cataloging every routine detail as if it held a key to national security. And the equipment, this wasn't nosy neighbor stuff. She'd invested serious money. The binoculars looked strong enough to spot satellites. The telephoto lens on her camera belonged in a BBC Nature documentary. She even had a filing system of charts, graphs, color-coded tabs. Red for parking violations, blue for property maintenance, yellow for behavioral concerns. This was no casual hobby. It was an obsessional one I was quickly realizing might consume both of us. Her filing system was disturbingly thorough. Red tabs for parking violations, blue for noise complaints, yellow for what she labeled suspicious activities, things as ridiculous as me checking the mail at slightly irregular times. But then came the part that went from bizarre to flat-out illegal. Around noon, Tom knocked on my door carrying a stack of printouts. He spread them across my kitchen table like evidence at a trial, and my stomach turned cold as I scanned the pages. "Your title is clean," he explained, tapping the county records. "No easement anywhere in the official documentation. Your property lines are exactly where they're supposed to be." Then he paused, looking uneasy. "Here's the really disturbing part. I only know this because of my IT security work. She's been using her law firm's computer system to dig into your background. Credit reports, court records, utility payment history, you name it. She's been running database searches on you." The printouts felt like my entire life reduced to timestamps and search queries. My name appeared over and over in the law firm's access logs, each entry proof that Abigail had broken not just professional ethics but probably federal privacy laws. Divorce records, business licenses, insurance claims, even medical files from an old workers' comp case, all in her hands. She'd picked apart my life with the precision of a forensic accountant but without any actual authority. And then came the punch to the gut. That afternoon, my phone rang. "Austin, this is Margaret from the Riverside renovation project." I knew what was coming before she even said it. "We've decided to go with someone else for the bathroom work. 3 months of planning, $75,000. Materials already ordered, gone in seconds." "It's nothing personal," Margaret added in that polite but deadly tone, "but we've received calls about potential legal issues with your licensing and insurance. We can't take the risk." Legal issues that didn't exist except in Abigail's twisted narrative, yet they were convincing enough to cost me the biggest job of my year. The next 4 hours were pure damage control. One phone call after another, peeling back layer after layer of Abigail's sabotage campaign. She'd filed false complaints with the contractor licensing board, forcing me to respond with official paperwork. She'd contacted my insurance provider multiple times, reporting unsafe practices and disturbances that could affect my coverage. She'd even called the Better Business Bureau with fabricated allegations of fraud, backed by fake witness statements that sounded alarmingly professional. This wasn't a hobby. It was a full-time harassment job, and she was terrifyingly good at it. I found out she had reached out to 3 of my clients anonymously, spreading lies about my work. She left detailed fake reviews on contractor sites, accusing me of damaging property and refusing to make repairs. She even tracked down my ex-wife's new number, calling her to dig up dirt from our divorce. The scope of it was staggering, impressive, in the most horrifying way. That evening, an email from the title company arrived like a lifeline. The legal language was dry and clinical, but the meaning hit me like a thunderbolt. After reviewing records back to the 1970s, they confirmed, no easement had ever been granted, filed, or legally recognized giving Abigail driveway rights across my property. Even current aerial photos confirmed her driveway crossed my land illegally. Every single day she backed out of her garage, she was trespassing, and she knew it. Those survey stakes, her nervous reaction when I asked about property lines, her desperate campaign to run me off before I discovered the truth. It all made sense. The woman screaming about rules and standards was committing the biggest violation in the entire neighborhood. And then my phone buzzed. A text lit the screen. "She's not the only one with access to records. Check your email." With shaking hands, I opened my laptop. The email waiting for me made my heart pound. It was from Derica, Abigail's own son. The subject line, "You need to see this." That's when it hit me. This wasn't about neighborhood codes, property values, or rules. This was personal. She didn't just dislike me, she hated me. Irrational, obsessive, horror movie level hatred. Why? Because I bought a house? Because I worked for a living? Because I wasn't her ex-husband? I couldn't know for sure, but sitting in the community center, watching her click through a slideshow of my life, I realized one thing. This wasn't just a difficult neighbor. This was someone who'd lost her grip on reality entirely. And she had my home address, my work schedule, and a dangerous amount of free time. Her meeting looked like something out of a warped corporate boardroom. Somehow, Abigail had convinced the community center to let her use their conference room, and she'd shown up 2 hours early to set up enough equipment to launch a space shuttle. A projector, a laptop, a laser pointer, extension cords snaking across the floor, and a 73-slide PowerPoint titled, Property Standards Enforcement and Community Threat Assessment. Neighbors wandered in looking like reluctant jurors, unsure what case they'd just been drafted into. The walls were lined with poster boards of photos of me doing completely normal homeowner tasks. displayed like evidence in a criminal investigation. She had timelines, charts in multiple highlighter colors, even a so-called behavioral analysis that tracked my daily routines as if I were a lab rat. Pie charts broke down my suspicious activities, like inconsistent mail retrieval and parking at different angles. Slide after slide tried to frame me as a threat to property values, community standards, and apparently the American way of life. Abigail wasn't just unhinged as she was building a full-blown case against me in her own imaginary courtroom. She came armed with charts mapping out truck angle variations, complete with protractor readings. I swear I'm not exaggerating. She even had a frequency graph labeled door slam analysis, tracking how hard I closed my front door each morning. When her laser pointer died midway through the presentation, she seamlessly switched to a kitchen spatula she'd brought as backup, tracing patterns of my so-called suspicious behavior as though she were presenting evidence in a high-profile criminal trial. What stunned me most was the sheer depth of her records. She knew exactly when I made coffee, which brand of cereal I bought, how long I spent checking the mail, even the days I did laundry based on my trips to the basement with a hamper. She had turned neighborhood surveillance into a twisted science project, and I was the unwilling specimen. She had photographs of my truck from 17 different angles, precise measurements of the distance between my garbage can and the curb, and some audio recordings of my private phone conversations in my backyard. Then came the audience participation segment, which pushed things from uncomfortable to downright disturbing. She distributed thick evidence binders, crammed with 347 color photos of me in everyday moments of watering plants, taking out the trash, grabbing the mail, or loading tools into my truck. Everything was meticulously categorized with colored tabs and cross-references like some bizarre library cataloging experiment. As my neighbors flipped through these invasive records, their faces revealed dawning horror. They realized they were dealing with someone who had crossed far beyond acceptable boundaries. Then her laptop overheated from running nearly an hour straight, and she scrambled desperately to restart it. That's when Tom caught my eye and subtly gestured toward his own laptop bag. It was our chance. The county survey I'd requested earlier had arrived that very morning, and Tom had helped me prepare a short but decisive presentation. I'd like to respond to the property boundary concerns Miss Gonzalez raised in her thorough analysis, I announced, connecting my laptop to the projector while she was still trying to salvage hers. Silence fell over the room as I pulled up the official survey map. Gasps echoed as the lines revealed Abigail's driveway slicing across my land by a full 12 feet. Every time she drove in or out of her garage, she was trespassing on my property. The irony was brutal. This woman who had spent the evening policing every detail of my life was herself guilty of the most blatant violation in the neighborhood. The room buzzed with whispers as Abigail fumbled, spilling papers and coffee while muttering about prescriptive rights and historical precedent. But the damage was irreversible. Everyone could see the evidence on the big screen. That's when I made a pivotal choice. The security system installation would begin the very next morning. Tom knew a specialist who handled residential surveillance, and after seeing Derek's email about her practice sessions, I wanted every encounter documented. More than that, I wanted to make a statement. She wanted to play property rights games. I'd show her what real property law looked like. The meeting closed with Abigail in frantic retreat, stuffing her gear into bags while neighbors whispered about what they had just witnessed. A few even apologized for staying silent about her behavior, admitting I wasn't her first victim. She'd run two other residents out with similar campaigns, but they'd chosen to leave rather than confront her. I was the first to actually research the laws and stand my ground. That night, I lay awake replaying the look on her face when the truth came out, a panic laced with rage, like a trapped animal realizing the cage was snapping shut. Derek's email had hinted she was planning something after the meeting, something she'd been plotting for weeks. The cameras were scheduled for installation in the morning, but what if she struck before then? At 2:30 a.m., my fears materialized. Motion sensors lit up my driveway like a stadium while the alarm howled through the night. From my bedroom window, I saw Abigail frozen in the spotlight, dressed in all black like a bargain bin burglar, key in hand, caught in the act of carving deep scratches into my truck. I grabbed my phone to call the police, But something else made my blood run cold. There was another figure, lurking in the shadows near my house. She wasn't working alone. Moments later, blue lights filled my driveway as Officer Ray stepped out of his cruiser. "Ma'am, drop the key." Abigail stood there, mid-scratch, completely exposed. Watching her get cuffed felt almost too good. Should I have felt pity? Maybe. Did I? Absolutely not. I felt the weight of 3 months of lost sleep, the clients I'd lost, the peace stolen from my first home, all of it being answered in that moment. Justice might be blind, but revenge sees crystal clear. Watching her hauled away in her ridiculous burglar outfit was like Christmas morning and my birthday rolled into one. The whole arrest played out like a dark comedy. Officer Reyes, a man who'd seen 2 decades of police work, looked almost amused as he processed the scene. Abigail tried to cling to some dignity in her all-black get-up, but ski masks in August and dollar-store grip gloves don't exactly scream authority. Her excuse? Comedy gold dipped in delusion. "I was conducting a late-night neighborhood safety inspection of his commercial vehicle," she declared as if she believed it. She claimed it was her duty as Community Standards Coordinator. Coordinator appointed by whom? The Constitution of Crazy Town? Officer Reyes barely reacted, just shook his head and started photographing the evidence. My scratched truck, her car key, and even a crowbar she carried for inspection purposes. She'd clearly come prepared for a full-blown break-in, but tried to spin it as civic responsibility. This part is where things got really interesting, and where Abigail's paralegal training actually worked in her favor for once. Sitting in the county jail wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed horribly with her personality, she somehow managed to research and file the most perfectly crafted legal document I had ever seen. An emergency ex parte temporary restraining order, complete with a supporting affidavit, photographic evidence, and a timeline of events so polished it could make a novelist weep with envy. She'd taken her arrest for vandalism and flipped it into a story where she was suddenly the victim of my so-called campaign of intimidation and harassment. The legal sleight of hand was honestly impressive. According to Abigail's version of reality, I had systematically escalated aggressive behavior designed to terrorize a vulnerable single woman. My crime? Parking my truck on my own property in a way that made her feel unsafe. She submitted carefully cropped photographs that made my work vehicles look menacing, edited audio recordings that turned normal construction sounds into something ominous, and even witness statements from people I'd never met claiming I'd made threatening gestures. She was a master manipulator, no question about it. The temporary victory she scored hit me like a sledgehammer. Judge Patterson, working only off Abigail's heavily sanitized documents, granted her emergency restraining order at an ex parte hearing where I wasn't even present. Suddenly, I was the one under legal restrictions. I had to move my truck away from the property line, couldn't park work equipment anywhere near my own driveway, and had to tiptoe around my own home while she got to play the innocent victim. Watching her celebrate was like swallowing broken glass mixed with battery acid. She actually did a victory dance in her driveway, at the same driveway that illegally crossed into my property, while I was forced to move my vehicles like some defeated tenant instead of the property owner. And the way she waved at me through her window, that smug little smile said it all. She had figured out how to weaponize the legal system against someone who followed the rules. For the first time since all this started, I wondered if I was in over my head. And then the fallout hit. Within 48 hours of the restraining order becoming public record, my phone was ringing non-stop with cancellations. Clients don't want contractors with legal troubles, even if those troubles come from neighbors with vendettas. I lost the Henderson kitchen renovation, $28,000. The Morrison bathroom addition, $32,000. The office complex plumbing job, $15,000. $75,000 in scheduled work evaporated because of one woman's character assassination. That's when Derek made the choice that would change everything. 3 days after his mother's courtroom win, I found a USB drive slipped under my door at 3 a.m., along with a shaky note. "I'm sorry about what she's doing. This might help. Don't let her know it came from me." The recording on that drive was 23 minutes of Abigail in her kitchen rehearsing her victim act like it was the role of her life. Fake tears, different versions of her terrorized story, and detailed strategy talks on speakerphone. But then came the bombshell in her confession, clear as day, in her own voice. I researched him before he even signed the papers, she bragged. Divorced contractor with money to burn. Thinks he can just move in here without understanding how things work. Well, I'll teach him his place. Nobody buys property on my street without my approval. The mask slipped completely. She had plotted this from the start. And Derek's note about the IRS investigation explained why he'd betrayed her $18,000 in back taxes from his cash-only detailing business, with federal agents threatening charges unless he gave them evidence of other criminal activity. Abigail's harassment campaign fit the bill perfectly. Sometimes justice shows up for the wrong reasons, but it's still justice. That USB drive wasn't just evidence of harassment, it was dynamite, proof of perjury, conspiracy, fraud. She had lied under oath, manufactured evidence, and likely committed federal crimes in her war against me. But using it meant Derek would destroy his mother forever, turning a bitter neighborhood feud into a full-blown legal nuclear war. That night, Derek stood outside my house at midnight, clutching the USB. Through the window, he saw me packing boxes, ready to give up on the Dream Edition. He raised a hand to knock, lowered it, raised it again. The evidence that could save me but obliterate his family weighed heavy in his palm. Then his eyes drifted to my laptop, left open on the kitchen table. On the screen was an email that changed everything, something Derek didn't yet know. And here's the thing nobody tells you about watching someone tear apart their own family: it's both horrible and deeply satisfying at the same time. Derek, sitting there, testifying against his own mother, it was like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion. The neighborhood buzzed with whispers, passed along the suburban grapevine. Even strangers I had never seen before seemed pulled to the scene, eager to witness the downfall of someone whose lies had ruled over others for years. There's something magnetic about community justice, like moths drawn to a flame, especially when the person being exposed has made life miserable for everyone. Derek's hands trembled violently as he placed the USB drive into the courtroom's evidence player. His hollow eyes and pale face showed the torment of his decision of choosing to turn against his own mother. For a fleeting moment, I pitied him. Destroying your parents' life has to rip your soul apart, even if they deserve it. But then I remembered the contracts I had lost, the dreams she had shattered, and the reputation she had smeared into the ground. That sympathy lasted only until he pressed play, and Abigail's own voice filled the courtroom, sealing her fate with every word. Her confession was chilling. I looked him up before he even unpacked a box. Divorced contractor, insurance payout just waiting to be spent. He thinks he can move in here without learning the rules? I'll teach that arrogant man his place. Nobody buys property on my street without my approval. The collective gasp from the gallery sounded like 20 people simultaneously realizing they'd been living next to a sociopath. Judge Thompson's face told its own story during the 23 minutes of audio. Disbelief when she described using her law firm's computers for research, anger when she outlined her scheme to sabotage my business, disgust when she laughed about making me jump at her fake violation notices. Finally, his expression hardened into that cold, professional look judges wear when they're about to deliver a devastating blow. "Mrs. Gonzalez," he said firmly when the recording ended, "do you have any comment on what this court has just heard?" Her defense was almost comical, like watching someone pour gasoline on a raging fire. She insisted the audio was out of context, claiming she'd been rehearsing for a community theater play about neighborhood disputes. Community theater, that was her story. She argued her research was simply due diligence and that her violation notices were legitimate efforts to preserve standards. But every excuse only dragged her deeper into the pit she had dug for herself. Then Derek produced the access logs from her firm's computer system. The printouts revealed every illegal search she had carried out, timestamped and tied directly to her workstation. My divorce records, business licenses, credit history, insurance claims, even medical files from an old workers' compensation case. Nothing was off limits. Each one was a violation of privacy laws, professional ethics, and countless state and federal statutes. She hadn't just harassed me, she had turned identity theft into a pastime. The final blow came with Derek's testimony about the IRS. He admitted his own car detailing business had hidden $18,000 in unreported income, and federal charges loomed over him like a sword. His immunity deal required exposing other crimes within his family, and Abigail's harassment campaign ticked every box prosecutors wanted. "I chose freedom over protecting my mother's lies," he confessed, voice breaking. "She asked me to help her. Instead, I chose my future." Judge Thompson's ruling was swift and merciless. On this recorded admissions, unlawful database access, systematic perjury, and fabricated evidence, the court finds clear and convincing proof of abuse of process. The restraining order is hereby vacated, and Mr. Gray is restored to full use of his property. He didn't stop there. Furthermore, this court issues a no-contact order protecting Mr. Gray from any further harassment by Mrs. Gonzalez and refers this matter to the state attorney's office for criminal prosecution. The wave of consequences hit Abigail before she even left the courthouse. Her own law firm fired her by text message while she was still seated at the defense table, her entire career collapsing in real time. Illegal database access and perjury aren't exactly the kind of things that look good on a paralegal's copyright. Copyright. The State Bar Association immediately launched an ethics investigation, and the outcome was obvious, as she would never again be allowed to work in the legal field. 15 years of carefully built professional credibility disappeared in less than half an hour, destroyed by her own recorded admissions. The same system she had weaponized against me had now expelled her for abusing it. The very next day, I filed my civil lawsuit. It was like salting the wound, except every injury had been self-inflicted. Defamation, business interference, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and 6 more claims my attorney had crafted while listening to her confession. Our demand was straightforward: $15,000 for my lost business, reimbursement of legal costs, and written apologies to every client she had poisoned with her lies. She had 30 days to comply or face a jury trial where her own words would condemn her further and likely cost her far more in punitive damages. Derek, meanwhile, delivered the final betrayal no son ever wants to make. He asked the court for a restraining order against his own mother. Standing tall despite the tears streaking down his face, he spoke with a steady voice. "Your Honor, my mother has shown a pattern of delusional and criminal behavior that has escalated beyond control. I fear for my safety and my mental health. She threatened to destroy me if I testified against her, and I believe she is capable of carrying out that threat." The judge didn't hesitate. The order was granted, officially severing the last legal tie between mother and son. But even as victory felt certain, one more twist surfaced, one that would change everything. During a recess, I finally opened an email from the county surveyor that had been sitting unread for 3 days. The first part confirmed what I already knew. No easement rights existed on my property. The recommendation was clear: file for a declaratory judgment immediately. My building permit was already pre-approved, pending the court's order. That meant I was less than 24 hours away from having full authority to shut down Abigail's driveway forever. But then I saw something else. The timestamp showed the county had known about the easement ruling 3 days earlier. And worse, there was a second email marked confidential that I hadn't dared open until now. When the fence went up on Tuesday, it was a perfect day. Birds sang, the sun shone, and I experienced the most expensive revenge of my life. Installed by licensed professionals, backed by permits and county approval. It wasn't just a fence. It was justice made tangible. Every post driven into the ground felt like a hammer striking down years of harassment. Every board lifted into place became a shield against her lies. And yes, every hour she lost access to her precious driveway felt like payback delivered at the perfect temperature. For a brief moment, as I watched her chain herself to a sprinkler head dressed in white, rolling in the grass like some suburban martyr, I almost considered calling it off. Almost. But then I remembered the 47 false police reports, and my sympathy evaporated faster than dew in August. That night, I finally opened the confidential email. The truth hit me like a tidal wave. The county planning office hadn't just been helpful with my permit, they'd been waiting for this chance. Abigail wasn't new to them. She had been a nightmare for over 2 years, filing 17 separate complaints against neighbors, demanding surveys she refused to pay for, and convincing herself she had authority over local development. The planning director's note was blunt: Mrs. Gonzalez has been a persistent source of frivolous complaints and harassment of county staff. Any legitimate action to resolve disputes in her area will have our full support. The declaratory judgment hearing became my victory lap after months of blind battles. Judge Thompson reviewed the county survey, the title company's research, the planning department's recommendations, and a stack of other documents. They all said the same thing. Abigail had no legal right to use my land for her driveway. With this ruling, Judge Thompson declared, his voice carrying the weight of authority, petitioner Austin Gray may erect a boundary fence per approved building permit. Respondent Abigail Gonzalez is permanently enjoined from entering petitioner's property, except in cases of legitimate emergency. The fence itself was flawless: a 6-foot cedar, decorative gate, proper setbacks, utility access, and materials stronger than codes required. The city inspector, who had once shown up at my door repeatedly because of Abigail's lies, visited again. But this time, he wasn't there to stop me. He was there to nod in approval. Clean installation, he said. Proper foundation depth, meets all municipal requirements. For the first time in months, I felt the fight was finally over. The inspector signed off on the certificate, and I couldn't help but savor the irony. It tasted even better than victory. The fencing crew I'd hired were top-notch professionals, veterans of countless property disputes, yet even they found the drama here unusually entertaining. She's been glued to her window with binoculars for 3 hours, the foreman mentioned during lunch. Never seen anyone treat a fence like it's a life-or-death matter. Still, they carried on with calm efficiency, hammering reality into the ground one post at a time, while Abigail scurried around her house, switching vantage points like a military scout. She photographed everything, as though preparing evidence for some international tribunal on fence-related war crimes. Her last act of resistance was both pitiful and strangely theatrical, a final stand for a cause that existed only in her imagination. Around noon, she appeared in what looked like a once expensive wedding dress, now wrinkled and grass-stained from her morning surveillance. With her came chains, padlocks, and a homemade sign scrawled in red marker, "Property rights are human rights." The ink was already bleeding in the humidity. Her plan? Chain herself to the fence construction in a grand gesture of civil disobedience. Except, in her frenzy, she latched on to the wrong thing, locking herself to the neighbor's sprinkler system instead of my project. Within moments, Abigail was stuck to an irrigation pipe that didn't even belong to her. Officer Reyes showed up shortly after my call. He surveyed the scene, lips twitching as he tried not to laugh. "Ma'am," he said, "you'll need to unlock yourself from that sprinkler head before we can talk this through." Unfortunately for Abigail, the combination lock she'd chosen in haste was one she couldn't remember. And so the absurd tableau unfolded: a middle-aged woman in a filthy wedding gown, chained to outdoor plumbing, fumbling frantically with number codes, while my crew kept working 20 feet away as though nothing unusual was happening. "Try her birthday," Tom shouted from his porch, sipping coffee and munching popcorn like it was a Saturday matinee. Or maybe the date she first called the cops on Austin. Even Reyes had to turn his face away to stifle laughter. The moment the fence was finished, it felt like pure poetry. 6 feet of cedar panels, brass hardware gleaming, fully permitted, 100% legal, and flawless in its craftsmanship. The gate closed with a heavy, confident click, a sound that rang like a gavel in the court of poetic justice. Standing there, holding the key, I felt like I'd won both the lottery and the Super Bowl at once. My prize? A boundary line that was mine and mine alone. The immediate effect was delicious. Abigail's car was now effectively imprisoned in her garage, trapped behind my fence. With no legal access to the street except through my property, she was forced to park 3 blocks away and haul her groceries, laundry, and work supplies back and forth every single day. The woman who had spent months trying to dictate how I could use my land had managed, through her own unlawful antics, to strip herself of access to hers. From my side of the fence, the neighborhood's response was fascinating. A few people felt sorry for Abigail. Public meltdowns are never easy to watch, even when deserved. But most were relieved. Their self-appointed enforcer had finally been disarmed, defeated not by wishful thinking but by someone willing to fight her with actual legal tools. According to Tom's real estate digging, Property values were already rebounding now that the neighborhood menace had been declawed. Over the next week, karma played out like clockwork. Every morning, Abigail would park far down the street and trudge back, arms full of whatever she needed for the day. Every evening, she repeated the ordeal in reverse, burdened with groceries, dry cleaning, and the crushing weight of her own bad decisions. Twice a day, she passed by my beautiful new fence, reminded at every step how spectacularly her campaign had collapsed. But then came the conversation that shifted things from ridiculous to chilling. One evening, as the sun dropped low, I overheard her through the cedar boards, speaking loudly into the phone. Phase 1 was the legal stuff, and that didn't work, she said. Time for Phase 2. My blood went cold. The fence was nearly done, the gate hardware going in, and Abigail, furious, trapped, and spiraling, was already preparing her next move. The officer's voice came through the line. "Ma'am, we're sending units for threats of violence." Austin overheard the call through the fence and realized Abigail's last desperate move was filing a false police report, claiming she'd received death threats. But then, he caught something even more disturbing. Abigail was still on another call, whispering that Phase 2 is a go. What on earth was Phase 2? So, what did I take away from all of this? First, never underestimate a determined troublemaker with too much time and a bottomless supply of offers stationery. Second, always read your property survey like your life depends on it, because it just might. And third, sometimes the sweetest revenge really is just living well, preferably behind a sturdy fence with a reliable lock. Do I feel sorry for Abigail? That's complicated. I pity anyone who gets so twisted inside that they think destroying a neighbor is the solution to their problems. I pity Derrick, who was forced to choose between his conscience and his own mother. But do I feel guilty that she lost? That her elaborate scheme collapsed so badly that she ended up losing everything she had tried to protect? Not in the slightest. Sometimes karma just needs a little push from building permits and property law. Her final play was reckless and absurd. Standing just 20 feet from my fence on a Tuesday night, Abigail called 911 and claimed I had threatened to eliminate her if she didn't leave the neighborhood. The trouble with lying to police, especially when you're already infamous on their radar, is that they investigate thoroughly, with the exhaustion of people who've been burned by you too many times before. Officer Reyes had dealt with Abigail's antics for over a year, and his patience had worn thinner than discount toilet paper around complaint number 37. The investigation into her false report was practically a case study in how not to deceive law enforcement. Reyes pulled up the complete history between Abigail and me, Tom's security footage, transcripts from the restraining order, and nearly 50 prior reports, all of which had been either fabricated or grossly exaggerated. The pattern was so obvious it could have been written in neon across the sky. A serial false reporter, running out of believable lies and getting more desperate by the day. My investment in security systems paid off better than anything else I'd ever purchased for that house. Between Tom's cameras and my own surveillance setup, every interaction with Abigail was documented, and none of it supported her claims. The recordings showed me deliberately avoiding her, rearranging my schedule to minimize run-ins, and acting like someone desperate to de-escalate, not intimidate. The audio alone destroyed her accusations, proving she had fabricated everything from scratch. But the real shock came when investigators uncovered just how premeditated her scheme was. This wasn't some panicked lie. Abigail had been rehearsing her victim performance for weeks and making practice calls to friends, perfecting her shaky voice, even timing her emotional outbursts for maximum effect. She'd researched the exact legal terms that would elevate a simple nuisance complaint into a felony-level threat report. She turned lying into a science. Her phone records sealed the case. In the 3 days before she called 911, Abigail made 17 inquiries to law enforcement agencies, asking hypothetical questions about threat procedures. She even phoned the domestic violence hotline to learn what kind of language would trigger the fastest response, and contacted the FBI field office with questions about interstate harassment laws. Every single call was logged and time-stamped, leaving behind a damning trail of malicious intent. By the time her plea hearing arrived, the drama almost felt anticlimactic, with video, audio, phone records, and years of false reports stacked against her. Abigail's public defender barely tried. The deal was simple and non-negotiable: plead guilty to filing a false report, pay $15,000 in fines for wasting public resources, accept 2 years of supervised probation, and undergo a mandatory psychological evaluation. The alternative was a jury trial she couldn't possibly win and jail time she couldn't afford. The most heartbreaking moment came from Derek's testimony. More painful than seeing Abigail in handcuffs was watching her own son stand in open court and plead for legal protection against her. "Your Honor, my mother's behavior has spiraled beyond anything I can manage or excuse," he said, his voice cracking. "She has threatened to ruin my life if I don't help her take revenge on Mr. Gray, and based on everything she's already done, I believe she's fully capable of following through." The judge granted the restraining order immediately, severing the last legal tie between mother and son. For me, the civil settlement that followed was just the bitter cherry on top of an exhausting ordeal. It turned out to be a very costly revenge for Abigail. She was ordered to pay $15,000 for defamation and interfering with business, cover all my legal expenses, and write a formal apology letter to every client she had misled with her lies. The money itself wasn't the real victory. I would have paid double just to witness her being arrested in that ridiculous burglar costume. Still, it felt satisfying that the woman responsible for my legal battles was now footing the bill. More importantly, the settlement created a lasting legal record of her actions and the motives behind them. Just 3 weeks later, a foreclosure notice appeared on Abigail's door. It was like watching the final domino topple in a chain reaction she had set in motion herself. She couldn't possibly handle her mortgage, the criminal fines, the civil judgment, and Derek's lost income all at once. The house she had fought tooth and nail to protect from people like me was now being taken by the bank because of her obsessive war against people like me. The irony was so sharp it felt like the universe had hired a professional writer to design the ending of this suburban nightmare. Yet the true satisfaction came from the small daily victories that followed. Seeing Abigail lug grocery bags 3 blocks to her car every morning, watching her stand at a bus stop in the pouring rain after her vehicle was repossessed, knowing that every glance she cast at my fence reminded her of how spectacularly her schemes had collapsed. She had set out to make my life miserable, but in the end, only succeeded in ruining her own. 6 months later, the final chapter of this saga arrived in the form of a Christmas card from Derek, sent from Phoenix. Thanks to his immunity deal and witness protection relocation, he had started a new life in Arizona. He was managing an auto shop and engaged to a kindergarten teacher named Sarah. His note read, "Thank you for showing me that sometimes doing the right thing means standing with strangers instead of family. Mom needed help I couldn't give, but you deserved justice I could deliver. I hope you're enjoying your peace and quiet." The card included a photo of him and Sarah smiling at the Grand Canyon, 2 people who looked like they had escaped a prison and discovered real freedom. "That fence of mine isn't just wood and metal, it's 6 feet of proof that actions have consequences, built to code and installed with the proper permits." I even added a brass nameplate that reads, "Property boundary, respect, and peace." Every morning when I see it, I'm reminded that some problems truly do have permanent solutions. Today, Derek oversees 3 auto shops, sends updates twice a year, and is married to Sarah with twins on the way. As for Abigail, last I heard through the neighborhood grapevine, she works part-time at a discount store and relies on the bus for transportation. The house she once guarded like Fort Knox now belongs to the Garcia family, whose kids play soccer in the same driveway she once tried to control. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's building solid boundaries and living happily behind them. If you enjoyed watching harassment collapse under its own weight, hit that like button and share your neighborhood battle stories in the comments. We've all met an Abigail at some point. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of property disputes where the good guys win through proper documentation and legal process. Pro tip: always check your title's Schedule B and your city's fence regulations before making property changes. Knowledge is power, and strong fences really do make the best neighbors. That's another story from Anna Drama Nest, where neighborhood drama finds justice. If you liked seeing Abigail's campaign of harassment backfire, Let me know in the comments and stay tuned for the next story, where we'll explore more tales of people who thought they could get away with anything until they crossed paths with someone who knew exactly how to fight back.